El Silbón, the whistling demon of the Llanos. The three ranch hands were finishing their night shift on the cattle farm in the remote Venezuelan plains when they heard it. A whistling sound, strange and melodic, echoing across the vast grassland. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. The 7 notes repeated over and over, carried on the hot night wind. Miguel, the oldest at 32, froze. His face went pale. "Get inside," he whispered urgently. "Now." His companions looked confused, but the terror in his eyes made them move. As they rushed toward the ranch house, the whistling grew louder, clearer. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Then Miguel realized something that made his blood run cold. The sound was getting quieter. And in the Llanos, every ranch hand knows that when El Silbón's whistle fades, he's no longer far away. It means he's standing right behind you. Their terrifying encounter with Venezuela's most feared wandering spirit is just one of thousands reported over 2 centuries. The legend of El Silbón, the Whistler, is considered one of the most enduring supernatural tales in Latin America. Today I'm going to share his story with you. The legend begins in the late 1700s in the vast grasslands of the Venezuelan Llanos, near the town of Guanarito in Portuguesa state. There lived a wealthy cattle rancher, his wife and their only son, a young man in his early 20s. The family had built their fortune through generations of hard work in the brutal environment of the plains. Their hacienda was one of the finest in the region, with thick walls against the heat, furnished with imported goods from Europe. The son, let's call him Sebastian, though his real name is lost to time, had grown up pampered and spoiled. Given every comfort his parents' wealth could provide, he had never known hardship or been told no. His father, despite the young man's flaws, loved him deeply and made excuses for his behavior. His mother doted on him obsessively, unable to refuse him anything. The ranch workers whispered about the spoiled young master, but kept their opinions quiet. Life was comfortable until one oppressively hot summer day when everything changed. Sebastian returned from riding and announced he was hungry, but not for ordinary food. He wanted deer heart for dinner, prepared exactly as he liked it. His mother, eager to please, sent word to his father, who was working on the range. The father, though it was late afternoon, took his rifle and dogs and headed into the forest bordering their property to hunt. Hours passed. The sun set, painting the sky orange and red, then fading to deep blue. Sebastian paced the hacienda, his hunger twisting into rage. Where was his father? Where was his meal? His mother offered other food, but he refused everything. When the father finally returned after dark, he was empty-handed. Despite hours of searching, he had found no deer. The animals had been scarce that day, perhaps spooked by a jaguar. He was exhausted, covered in sweat and dirt, ready to sit down to whatever dinner was available. Sebastian met his father at the door, his face twisted with fury. He began screaming, berating his father for failing him, calling him useless and incompetent. The father, shocked and tired, tried to reason with his son. He explained he had searched for hours, that sometimes nature doesn't cooperate with our desires. But something had snapped inside Sebastian. Years of getting everything he wanted, of never facing consequences, of believing the world existed to serve him. It all converged in that moment of being denied. In his twisted mind, his father's failure was a personal betrayal that demanded response. Before anyone could react, Sebastian grabbed a knife from his belt. His mother screamed. The houseworkers backed away in horror, and in one terrible motion the young man drove the blade into his father's chest. The patriarch staggered backward, eyes wide with shock and pain. He clutched the wound, looking at his son with an expression mixing disbelief, anguish, and something that might have been pity. Blood filled his mouth as he tried to speak. He collapsed onto the wooden floor, his life draining away as his wife and workers rushed to his side. Within minutes, he was gone, his hand still reaching toward his son. Sebastian stood over the body, knife in hand, and whatever humanity remained in him seemed to drain away. His mother's screams filled the night. The workers stared in stunned silence. What happened next depends on which version you hear. In some tellings it was the grandfather who arrived and pronounced the curse. In others, a mysterious old woman, perhaps a witch or spirit of the plains itself. But in all versions, the same terrible punishment was decreed. The young man would be cursed for his crime. He was beaten savagely, his body broken but not killed. Then he was tied to a post and lashed repeatedly, the whip tearing open his back. The grandfather took the father's bones and placed them in a rough burlap sack, tying it to Sebastian's broken back, forcing him to carry the weight of his crime forever. 2 hunting dogs that had belonged to the father were cursed alongside him. They would chase Sebastian eternally, snapping at his heels, never allowing him rest. Whenever he stopped, they would attack viciously, driving him onward. The final curse, Sebastian would wander the Llanos forever, neither alive nor dead, unable to rest or die. He would walk the plains for eternity, carrying his father's bones, pursued by the dogs, and he would whistle, a 7-note melody announcing his presence. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. But there was a twisted deception. When the whistle sounded close and clear, the spirit was far away. When it grew faint and distant, El Silbón was standing right beside you. That night, broken and bleeding, the heavy sack dragging him down, Sebastian stumbled into the darkness. The dogs followed, eyes glowing red, teeth bared. And as he walked, he began to whistle. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. A haunting melody that carried across the empty plains. From that night on, El Silbón has wandered. Reports spread quickly throughout the Llanos. Ranch hands working night shifts would hear the whistling on the wind. They would see a tall, impossibly thin figure silhouetted against the moon, a large sack on his back, 2 dogs at his heels. The whistle was always the same, those 7 notes, endlessly repeated. Ranch workers learned the rules of survival fast. Whistle sounds close. He's far away, perhaps miles across the plains. Whistle sounds faint and distant. Get inside immediately. Lock the doors and pray. Because El Silbón was right there, perhaps outside your window, perhaps already inside. The spirit seemed drawn to certain people. Men drunk on aguardiente, the local liquor, were particularly vulnerable. Men unfaithful to their wives, men who beat their children, men who had murdered. These were his preferred prey. Some said he searched for men who resembled him. Others claimed he could smell guilt and sin like a predator smells blood. One early documented encounter from 1825 involved a rancher named Tomás. Working alone fixing a fence at sunset, he heard the whistling, deafening as if someone was beside him whistling into his ear. He looked around but saw nothing. Relief washed over him. Loud whistle meant the spirit was far away. But then the whistle began to fade, quieter and quieter. Tomás felt his stomach drop. He abandoned his tools and ran for his horse. The whistle was barely audible now. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. He rode hard for his ranch house 5 miles away. Behind him, he heard dogs baying, getting closer. When he reached his house, he threw himself inside and slammed the door. All night he heard the whistling circling his house, sometimes faint, sometimes louder. The dogs scratched at his door. He heard something else, bones rattling in a sack, being dumped on his porch, counted one by one. The whistle never stopped. By morning, the sounds ceased. Thomas waited until full daylight before opening his door. Nothing was there, no footprints, no bones, no signs of a visitor. But Thomas was never the same, becoming withdrawn and fearful, refusing to work after sunset. As decades passed, the legend spread. In Apure, they said El Silbón was impossibly tall, 8 or 9 feet, skeletal and thin, with arms hanging to his knees. His face was gaunt and pale, with hollow eyes glowing faint red. He wore tattered rags, once fine garments. The sack was stained brown with old blood, and bones rattled inside as he walked. In regions around Lake Maracaibo, stories emerged of El Silbón entering homes. If you opened your door when hearing the faint whistle, he would come inside. He would set down his sack and count the bones, one by one, laying them on your floor. If anyone watched him count, they would be marked for death. Within a week, they would die under mysterious circumstances. The only protection was dogs. El Silbón feared them because of the cursed hounds pursuing him. If you had dogs, they would bark and growl at his approach, and usually he would pass by. Some families hung chili peppers outside their doors, believing the smell would repel the spirit. A detailed 1892 account from Captain Rodriguez, a Venezuelan military officer, describes his patrol unit hearing the whistling at night. The educated captain dismissed it as wind, but his soldiers from the Llanos became agitated. The whistle was loud, the spirit was far away. But over an hour, it grew quieter. When it faded to a whisper, a soldier screamed and pointed into the darkness. The captain saw a figure, impossibly tall and thin, walking parallel to their group, keeping pace. A large sack on its back, 2 large dogs flanking it. He ordered his men to stop. The figure stopped. They rode forward. It moved with them. A soldier fired his rifle. The bullet had no effect. The figure continued walking, and the whistling continued. The captain ordered a full gallop. They rode for miles before daring to stop. Behind them, growing fainter but still audible, the whistle continued. Throughout the 20th century, even as Venezuela modernized, El Silbón reports persisted. In the 1970s, a truck driver named Carlos was making a late-night delivery when he heard the whistling start loud, then fade. When it became nearly inaudible, his truck died. The engine just stopped. He couldn't restart it. Then he heard bones rattling beside his truck and dogs sniffing around his vehicle. Carlos sat in his truck all night, terrified, listening to sounds outside. The whistling never stopped. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. By morning, the sound ceased and his truck started normally. When people investigated, they found deep scratches on his truck doors, low to the ground, as if made by large claws. El Silbón reports continue today. In the digital age, these stories have found new life online, with dozens of claimed recordings of the whistle and alleged photographs of a tall figure in the distance. But in the rural Llanos, where the legend began over 2 centuries ago, the old people still warn the young. If you're out at night and hear that 7-note whistle, pay attention to how loud it is. If it's close and clear, you might be safe. But if it fades, if it becomes faint and distant, then El Silbón is near, and you should run. Because somewhere across the vast Venezuelan grasslands, a cursed soul still wanders, tall and skeletal, carrying a blood-stained sack of his father's bones, pursued by demon dogs, his back forever broken from punishment. And as he walks, he whistles. Do, re mi fa sol la ti, an eternal melody of guilt and vengeance, a reminder that some sins can never be forgiven. The legend endures because it speaks to something primal, the fear of consequences, the weight of guilt, the knowledge that some actions cannot be undone. Whether real or merely a story told to keep people honest and children respectful, El Silbón has become permanent in Venezuelan folklore. And on quiet nights in the Llanos, when wind blows across the endless plains, some people swear they can still hear it. That haunting 7-note whistle carried on the darkness, sometimes loud, sometimes faint, always unsettling. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. La Sayona, the white ghost of Venezuela. Today, I'm going to share with you the complete story of this vengeful ghost who has haunted Venezuela for centuries. One night in the 1970s, a truck driver named Miguel Sanchez was making his usual route through the remote highways of Barinas State in western Venezuela when he spotted a woman in white standing alone on the side of the road. She was beautiful, with long dark hair and pale skin that seemed to glow in his headlights. She waved him down, desperate for a ride to the next town. Miguel, a married man with 3 children waiting for him at home, should have driven past, but something made him stop. She climbed into the passenger seat, smiling sweetly, her white dress pristine despite the dust of the road. They drove in silence for several minutes, the woman staring straight ahead. Then Miguel made a joke, something flirtatious, testing the waters. The woman turned to look at him and her face began to change. Her beautiful features twisted and elongated. Her eyes became hollow black voids and her mouth stretched into an impossible grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Miguel screamed and lost control of the truck, crashing into a ditch. When other drivers found him hours later, he was catatonic, unable to speak. His hair turned completely white. He never drove again. His story is just one of hundreds, maybe thousands, of encounters with Venezuela's most terrifying spirit, La Sayona. The legend of La Sayona begins in the early colonial period of Venezuela, sometime in the late 1700s, in a small village nestled in the plains of what is now Guanare, in the state of Portuguesa. The village was like any other in that region. Simple houses with thatched roofs, a central plaza with a church, and families who had lived there for generations, making their living from the land. At the center of this story was a woman named Casilda. She was considered the most beautiful woman in the village, with striking features and dark flowing hair that reached her waist. Her beauty was so remarkable that men from neighboring towns would travel just for a chance to see her. When she was 19 years old, she married a man named Raul, a cattle rancher who owned substantial land near the village. By all accounts, Raul was a good man, hard-working, honest, and deeply in love with his wife. He treated Casilda like a queen, building her a larger house than anyone else in the village, bringing her fine fabrics from the city, and showering her with attention. Casilda gave birth to a son, and for a time their family seemed blessed. The ranch prospered, their cattle multiplied, the village respected them. Casilda's mother, an elderly woman named Gabriela who lived with them, helped care for the child and manage the household. By every measure, Casilda had everything a woman of that era could want: a devoted husband, a healthy child, a comfortable home, and status in her community. But Casilda had a flaw that would prove to be her undoing. She was consumed by jealousy and suspicion. Despite Raul's obvious devotion, she constantly questioned his faithfulness. When he came home late from working the cattle, she accused him of seeing other women. When he spoke to female neighbors at church, she interrogated him for hours. When he traveled to sell cattle in other towns, she convinced herself he was meeting lovers. Raul endured these accusations with patience, always denying them, always reassuring her, but nothing could satisfy Casilda's paranoid mind. The village elders whispered that Casilda's jealousy was unnatural, that perhaps she projected her own wandering eye onto her faithful husband. But no one dared speak such things openly. Casilda's beauty and her husband's wealth protected her from direct criticism. For 3 years, this pattern continued. Then came the day that everything changed. It was a hot afternoon in March when Casilda's suspicions reached their breaking point. Raul had left before dawn to drive cattle to a market 2 days' ride away. He would be gone for nearly a week. Casilda spent those days in a state of agitation, pacing the house, snapping at her mother, neglecting her son. Her mind spun elaborate scenarios of Raul's betrayals, each more vivid than the last. On the 5th day, her mother Gabriela could no longer bear to see her daughter in such torment. In what she believed was an act of mercy, Gabriela sat Casilda down and spoke words that would damn them both. "Daughter, I must tell you something I have kept secret too long," Gabriela said, her voice heavy with false concern. "Raul has been unfaithful to you, many times, with many women. I've seen him with a woman from the next village. I didn't want to break your heart, but you deserve to know the truth." It was a complete lie. Gabriela had invented the story to give Casilda's jealousy a target, to somehow release the pressure that was destroying her daughter from within. Perhaps she thought that if Casilda believed her suspicions were confirmed, she could finally confront Raul and move past this obsession. Perhaps Gabriela simply didn't think at all. Casilda's face went pale, then flushed with rage. Her hands began to shake. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. "You've seen this? You're certain?" she asked, her voice unnaturally calm. "Yes, my daughter. I'm so sorry, but yes, I'm certain." What happened next occurred so quickly that Gabriela barely registered what was happening. Casilda stood up, walked to the kitchen, and returned with the large knife they used for butchering. Before her mother could speak, could take back her lie, could do anything, Casilda drove the blade into her mother's chest. Gabriela's eyes went wide with shock and pain. She tried to speak, to confess her lie, but only blood came from her mouth. She collapsed to the floor, and within moments, she was gone. Casilda stood over her mother's body, the knife still in her hand, her white dress now stained with red. Her son, only 3 years old, had witnessed everything from the doorway of his room. He began to scream. The child's scream seemed to break through Casilda's rage. She looked down at what she had done, at her mother's lifeless body, at the blood on her hands and dress. Horror replaced rage. She dropped the knife and ran from the house, her son's cries echoing behind her, still convinced that her mother had been telling the truth about Raul's infidelity. Casilda ran into the forest that bordered their property, running without direction, without purpose, driven only by the need to escape what she had done. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, collapsing finally at the base of a large ceiba tree deep in the woods. As she lay there, sobbing and gasping, something changed in the forest around her. The sounds of birds and insects stopped. The air grew heavy and still. A presence materialized before her. Accounts vary on what exactly appeared, but all versions agree. It was something divine or demonic, a supernatural force that had witnessed her crime, Some say it was the spirit of the forest itself. Others claim it was God sending judgment. Still others believe it was the ghost of her mother speaking from beyond death. But whatever it was, it pronounced a curse upon Casilda. The voice filled the forest, coming from everywhere and nowhere. You have murdered your innocent mother based on lies and jealousy. You have abandoned your child. You have destroyed your family through your own paranoia and rage. For this, you will never know peace. You will walk this earth as a spirit, forever seeking but never finding, forever hunting but never satisfied. You will appear to men who betray their women, and you will punish them as you wish you had punished your husband. But you will never be able to return to your own family, never be able to undo what you have done. You will be La Sayona, the spirit in the white dress, until the end of time. Casilda screamed and tried to run again, but her body wouldn't move. She felt herself changing. Her beautiful features began to shift and morph. Her face elongated, her teeth sharpened, her eyes became hollow. Her white dress, stained with her mother's blood, turned pure white again. But now it was the white of death, of grave clothes, of ghostly apparitions. When the transformation was complete, Casilda was no more. Only La Sayona remained. The next morning, Raul returned home from his cattle sale, happy and eager to see his wife and son. Instead, he found a scene of horror. His mother-in-law dead in a pool of dried blood, his son traumatized and alone, and his wife vanished without a trace. The village searched the forests for days but found no trace of Casilda. Her son, when he could finally speak, told a story that no one fully believed. His mother had killed his grandmother and then run away. The boy was too young to explain clearly what he had seen. Raul was devastated, unable to understand what had happened to his wife or why his mother-in-law was dead. Within weeks, however, the first sightings began. A man named Carlos, known in the village for his habit of visiting women while his wife was away, was walking home late one night when he encountered a beautiful woman in a white dress standing in the road. She asked him for help, claiming she was lost. Carlos, seeing an opportunity, offered to walk her home via a route that took them far from the village. As they walked, he made increasingly forward suggestions. The woman smiled and agreed to everything. Then, when they were completely alone, she turned to face him, her features twisted into something monstrous. Her face became skeletal, her eyes empty black holes, her mouth a gaping maw. She let out a shriek that Carlos later said sounded like all the screams of hell combined. He ran, but he could hear her chasing him, her white dress billowing impossibly in the still air, her skeletal hands reaching for him. He barely made it back to the village, where he collapsed in the plaza, babbling and terrified. Within a week, his hair had turned completely white. Another man, Felipe, who was known to have a mistress in a neighboring town, encountered a woman in white while riding his horse at night. She appeared suddenly in the road, causing his horse to rear up. Felipe, a brave man and a skilled rider, managed to control his mount and asked the woman what she needed. She asked for a ride to the next village. Felipe, despite feeling uneasy, agreed. She climbed up behind him on the horse. As they rode, Felipe felt her arms around his waist grow cold, impossibly cold, like embracing ice. He turned to look at her face and saw a skull grinning at him, patches of rotted flesh clinging to bone. He jumped from the horse while it was still moving, breaking his arm in the fall. The horse reared and bucked, throwing off the white figure, then ran wild into the night. Felipe limped back to town, his arm useless, his mind shattered. The pattern became clear. La Sayona appeared to unfaithful men, men who betrayed their wives or partners, men who thought they could lie and cheat without consequence. She would appear as a beautiful woman, gain their trust or inflame their lust, and then reveal her true, horrifying form. Some men died of fright, others went mad. All were changed forever. As the decades passed, accounts of La Sayona spread throughout western and central Venezuela. The ghost was no longer confined to the region around Guanare. She appeared on remote roads in Barinas, in the forests of Portuguesa, along the rivers of Apure, in the mountains of Lara. Anywhere there were men who betrayed their partners, La Sayona might appear. Today, if you drive through western Venezuela at night, you might still hear locals warn you about picking up hitchhikers, especially women in white dresses. The story of La Sayona has become inseparable from the landscape itself, a permanent feature of Venezuelan folklore and consciousness. What remains unexplained is the origin of the legend itself. While the story of Casilda provides a narrative framework, there's no historical evidence that such a woman existed or that such a murder occurred. The earliest written accounts of La Sayona date only to the early 20th century, though the oral tradition is clearly older. Some historians believe the legend may have roots in indigenous Venezuelan mythology, later merged with Spanish Catholic concepts of sin and punishment during the colonial period. The enduring power of La Sayona lies not just in the terror she inspires, but in what she represents: the consequences of jealousy, the price of betrayal, and the idea that some wrongs create ripples that never stop spreading. Casilda's jealous rage destroyed her family and cursed her to an eternal existence as an instrument of vengeance. Men who betray their partners risk encountering the physical manifestation of guilt and punishment. Whether La Sayona is a real supernatural entity, a collective psychological phenomenon, or simply a powerful story that serves social purposes, she remains very real in the minds of Venezuelans. Truck drivers still refuse certain routes at night. Men still report encounters with women in white who transform into nightmares. The legend continues to grow, continues to evolve, continues to terrify. And on lonely roads throughout Venezuela, when a beautiful woman in white appears in the darkness, the question remains: is she just a lost traveler needing help? Or is she La Sayona, the white ghost, the eternal punishment for those who betray love? The answer perhaps depends on the state of your soul.
We made it out of this one, but the darkness runs deep. If you think you can handle it, check out the other cases on the channel. Don't risk losing the signal. Like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. The next investigation is starting now.